Hey guys, and welcome to video number 3 for chapter 21, where we'll be talking about states in North and South America. So we'll start off talking about in North America. And North America, you did not have the major civilizations. You didn't see the urban civilizations like you did in Middle and South America. You have what we call small-scale societies. Now, there were a lot of societies here. I don't want to make it seem like these were just kind of, savages, the way that I'm sure a lot of, European and American people depicted them, in the 17, 18, and even into the 1900s. You had a combination of small agricultural societies. You had agriculture societies down here in the Southwest. You had agriculture societies, a lot of them here in the Eastern Woodlands. And you also did have nomadic hunter-gatherers, especially along the plains. Okay, but they all developed rich cultural traditions with distinct religion, art, storytelling, language especially. They just didn't fit the criteria to truly be considered civilizations. For civilizations, you have to have that checklist. Cities, complex government, complex religions. Writing was a big one. You really didn't have writing north of the Rio Grande River. Okay, writing pretty much only existed in Middle and South America. So they are complex cultures. We just don't consider them to be true civilizations. Now, some examples of settled agriculture, as I said, you did have here in the Northeast, but also the Pueblo and the Navajo down here in, what today would be like Arizona and New Mexico. They practice agriculture, and they also established permanent stone and clay dwellings. We see these that have survived to the day, the Puebla that you'll find down there. Along the east coast of North America, you had the Iroquois. They established permanent settlements as well. You've got the original 5 members of the Iroquois Confederation. You can kind of make them out there. The flag that you'll see sometimes, around in this area, particularly on some of the reservations. You got the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk. They were an early Native American confederation. And then as you start getting more into the Mississippi River along the valleys there, you see the mound builders. The most impressive of these was the Cahokia Mound, and this is today just a little bit outside of East St. Louis in Illinois. Here's a picture of it. It was the 3rd largest structure in the Western Hemisphere before the Europeans, and this was pretty much the closest that you got to multi-story buildings in North America. They built longhouses, they built the Puebla, but you didn't see the temples, you didn't see the large buildings that you saw among the Mexica and the one that we're talking about now, the Inca. All right, so let's move on to South America. Now, these South American states are primarily found along the Andes Mountains. Okay, before the Inca, you did have smaller regional states such as the Chiquitu and the Chimu, and they maintained order in the Andes. All right, so the Andes are, we're talking about the Pacific coast. Now, it's not that nobody lived in here in Brazil and along the Amazon basin. It's that this is where you had your actually more organized states and what we would consider to be civilization. Right, so starting around the 15th century, these smaller states were absorbed into the larger empire of the Inca. They settled around the region of Lake Titicaca, and they began conquering the neighboring people in the mid-15th century under the leadership of their emperor, Pachacuti. Now, he was a member of the warrior class. There's a picture of him. And he established absolute rule for Inca empires. Okay, they were autocrats. There was no going against their will. He also laid the foundation for a relatively complex bureaucracy, which included tax collection, state ownership of agriculture and textile production, and most notably, a very impressive road network. You see the extent that it went down to, and also shows the modern outlines of how far the Inca Empire. It went went up into Ecuador, the majority of it found in modern-day Peru, a little bit into Bolivia, and then down into Chile along the border between Chile and Argentina. So this road network really was impressive. It was among the best in the world before modern times. Facilitated travel for both military and government agents. The Spanish, when they came along these roads, they were very, very impressed by them. And as you can see, a number of them have survived to this day, going up through the mountains. They were wide. You could fit 4 to 5 people shoulder to shoulder along in there. Some other achievements that you had in here was Quipu. What was very fascinating about the Inca was that they didn't develop a very complex written system, but they would use These things, they look like hippie necklaces, but the knots and the beads that you'd put on these, they represented numbers, right? They represented values. And you could use these for doing arithmetic, and you could use these for keeping records. Think of it kind of like a string version of a abacus, right? The old Roman method where you move the beads in order to represent different numbers. And also, as a civilization, they did have larger cities. The most important of them was Cuzco. That was the capital and the center of the Inca Empire. It was a center of trade, even though trade wasn't that big. We'll talk about that in a second. And it was also the spiritual center where they had their priests, and obviously it was where Pachacuti first made his home, and so it became the seat of their emperors and their government. Now, a bit about Inca society. First, with trade. Ironically, given its wealth and great roads, trade was not all that big for the Inca. The merchant class was not a sizable social class. All long-distance trade was directly supervised by the central government, so it really didn't give a lot of opportunity for the merchants to get into business for themselves. Plus, and this is important to remember about the Inca, the emperor technically owned all property. The Inca didn't really have private property, so buying and selling goods for profit just wasn't a big thing. So trade did exist. You'd have the barter system, trading things outright, but in terms of merchants emerging to control trade networks to accumulate wealth, that didn't really exist too much in the Inca Empire. You did have a very distinct social structure. Okay, as you can imagine, the emperor and his immediate family was up at the top. You see, this was a later Inca emperor. You see the sun here as a symbol. That's important. We'll come to that in a second. They believed the emperor to be a descendant from the sun god. You know, he was absolute. He was also infallible. There was no questioning him. He couldn't make a mistake. Aristocrats and priests, right? They made up the next one with the nobles. Commoners, as you can imagine, they made up the majority of society, and they lived in communities known as Elu. Elu would consist of several families living together on aristocratic lands. And they'd have to work on those lands. In addition, the commoners often would have to work on lands owned by the aristocrats, so a lot of them would have to pull double duty. Then on top of it, many times they'd be drafted into working on the big government projects like the roads. So the commoners, the peasants, they were kept very, very busy. Now, religion, as I alluded to before, the sun god was their main one, the god Inti. He was their primary god, which is why the emperor made a connection with him. Sacrifices were made to him, but it was usually animal sacrifices. The Inca didn't practice human sacrifice the way that the Mexica did. They would sacrifice animals such as guinea pigs, or more commonly, and much more appropriately, llama. So that was a good thing, killing llama. Also, there was a moral code that was built into it. You know, the Inca religion taught that sin is a violation of the natural order established by the gods. They did believe in a life after death, and they also believed that there was a punishment or reward for your actions in life. So similar to a Christian idea of heaven and hell. So just that was a bit about North and South America, and then in the next video we will talk about the societies of the Pacific Ocean, of Oceania.